All right, thanks again for joining us here at the Lightning Step Couch. My name is Benjamin Turner. I am your behavioral health advocate. In this series, we put a spotlight on innovators in the behavioral health and mental health space. And today, joining us is Ryan Douglas, founder of DeepWell DTx. And oh boy, am I excited to learn a little bit more from Ryan. This is a really interesting topic, Ryan.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and DeepWell DTx and how it all came to be?
Sure. I mean, backing up, I've been in medical device for about 20 years. Have a track record or been known for getting a lot of things commercialized in a shorter period of time. So myself and a crew of people through an organization called Nextern got 27 devices in the field over a span of about 17 years. Some of them were very mental health related. We worked a lot on things that were home-based therapeutics and also at the intersection between robotics and therapeutics, so surgical devices for ablation and things like that, but always accessibility to care, affordability of care were sort of that were central to the theme of what we were doing. Did it out of that in 2000, just kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, and was kind of settling in for a break when really saw this need arising around mental health, a place we had worked before, but a new rising need on, I'd say, the greatest level that we've potentially seen before. And that led to collaboration with some folks who had worked more in immersive media and the media environment, how we could get accessibility of space, and specifically where video games could play in here, and what they would look like as digital therapeutics, and how we could maybe replicate some successes we had seen in research where it was really interesting. Now, this is about the mental health space more than anything else, but in mental health, the most wildly therapeutic games have been accidentally so. So the most therapeutic thing you can do is play certain video games that were never designed to be treatments, and that actually was interesting when we saw people trying to gamify or trying to use edutainment or trying to reach this from a digital therapeutic standpoint. Then they weren't necessary as, and oftentimes in studies we're performing drug therapies and talk therapies.
That's exciting, man. And that's what we're talking about today is digital therapeutics and behavioral health. So
That's right.
can you explain what digital therapeutics are and how they differ from other digital health tools?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think primarily that they are a treatment or a diagnostic versus a tool that would something to help you keep things, and they are a regulated medical device. So by the time you're talking about a digital therapeutic, you are using a digital delivery of something to modify behavior and get a result. So it's interesting. They're seen as software as a medical device by the agency, but they function, as we're looking at them now, maybe even a little bit more like a drug than they do like a device.
Yeah, that's crazy. I'm so excited about this. So are there examples of digital therapeutics that are currently being used to treat mental health?
Yeah, so I mean they're all out pretty much today across the board. They're prescriptions. So I mean the trick with this here is that today the agency wants to approve them up here, but reimbursement is not yet available. So it's that alignment between things being commercially available and things being reimbursed. But there is I understand somewhere in the neighborhood of a little under 20 of them that have been approved. In mental health, there's about 5, but they seem to be, there's an ADHD application, and there's a couple things for enhancing cognitive behavioral therapy. But in the world we work in, more like a generalized stress, anxiety, depression, those sorts of things, we haven't seen something available today. And then really differentiated, we're the first folks to work on something that would be over the counter available. And so that means it's still a regulated device, it's still clear the FDA, but you don't need a prescription. And you can get direct access to it, and you can get direct access to it through the machines you already have, your cell phone, your computer, a gaming console. And so that really plays into that idea of accessibility of care and utilizing existing infrastructure to try to propagate as much care as we possibly can.
That is so cool. I'm like nerding out on this, man. I love this topic. It's so neat to see something like this therapy. Uh, how do you see this fitting into a larger landscape of behavioral health care? And is this a replacement for traditional therapy?
Not yet, and I think that's really important. We see it as an adjunct, and I really think what's important is to elevate it up, to recognize, first of all, that when we talk about people with severe behavioral issues, right now what we know is that they need care through a physician. But we have a whole lot of us that can't access that, and a whole lot of us with the mild to moderate symptoms and adjunctive cares really matter, maybe to keep people from falling down to the place of severe disease where we just don't have enough folks to treat them. So adjunct for sure, we're not looking, and nor is there anybody to replace. Like there's not like we can replace folks. We don't have enough of them currently. There's not a patience or a lack of need that we would then find a way to be efficient. It's more like there's so much pent up need that we've got to find a way to help supplement in any way we can, and that's what we're really looking at.
Awesome. Thanks for clarifying that. I think it provides a lot of insight on how this is going to be used in the future. Um, so speaking of that, what are the biggest potential benefits of digital therapeutics?
Well, I think we've already kind of started bouncing on them, but the first thing I'm going to say
Hmm.
is it's the accessibility to care, right? Yeah, these things are on your phone, they're on your computer. If they're done right, in my opinion, after years of making devices where we went all the way to these very sophisticated robotic systems, home-based therapeutics that were very customized hardware, what we have the opportunity now is to go back to the idea of simple sensors. What can we use that's already in that phone, which is the democratization of technology on the highest level. I mean, everybody knows that if we had to get everything that's in a phone, 20 years ago, there's $1 million worth of technology in there. That's right at our disposal. How can we use to get access and allow access to care and make that care affordable in a way that folks have an opportunity to, achieve a more optimal health in a realistic environment? There just isn't enough money. There isn't enough doctors. There is not enough insurance. So that's where I think digital therapeutics become pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk about underserved populations, do you find this to be more accessible, less accessible? How does it play to underserved populations?
Right to the technological divide. So like especially when we talk about using video games, when you look at my career, we've like a smack out of the park is a device used by 100,000 folks. I did light therapy devices, then we had reach in the millions, but small millions, but still strong impact. Those are big numbers in healthcare. When we talk about video games and the ubiquity of access, there's 3 billion people on these platforms. And so if we can get the agency and the docs comfortable with the idea that what's already out there is useful too, we can piggyback on the largest population that we can get reach to, right up to the technological divide. And we got to recognize not everybody can afford a phone, not everybody can afford, even a $30 app or game, but it does take us to a whole different threshold than requiring, insurance, requiring to find yourself a doctor, being able to pay the co-pays and all that sort of stuff. It certainly does open us up to a lot more care.
Absolutely. So, so people, doctors, and people that may be able to use this, clinicians that may be able to use this in their practice, they're not familiar with it. It's a new technology. What might some of the limitations or challenges be on these digital treatments? Why, what might make them hesitant, even if it's not worthy of hesitation, the limitations?
Yeah, I mean, so if we talk about what's out there right now, I think limitation for the most part is just understanding and having enough time as a doctor who is so busy seeing, everybody is at max at the patients that they can see, and themselves as providers, they're not very healthy at the moment. They're doing everything they can to stay engaged. So I think that is probably your first limitation. The secondary limitation is that most of them are prescription based, and so what we see is something that we got to help people understand is that when we get something over the counter, which is work that I've done before, make this accessible to folks, there's this idea of shifting who has control or over their treatment, and putting that back in the hands of the patient can be disconcerting. Well, what if they go around the doctor? What if they're not there, and become suicidal and they don't have someone to back them up? But I also have to look at the truth of the truth. And the truth of the truth is 70% of folks that become suicidal or attempt suicide never had the opportunity or chose to take the opportunity to get that kind of care anyways. And so it's a lot like, why did we vaccinate everybody with only 1 year of drug testing? Because we had to, right? And
Yeah.
and this is
Yeah.
the same thing here. I mean, is it ideal? No, everybody should have a psychologist, psychiatrist, and all support networks should be pointing them in the right direction. We're not near there, and so we've got to help people understand how these tools fit into, and get docs to understand them, and really even get patients to understand that they're out there and available for them.
That is a great point to make. And thanks for clarifying that as well, as far as the limitations and why people might be hesitant about that. So we're talking about developing and testing this in the process of going through that. What kind of clinical validation is required for something like this, if any?
Yeah, I mean, so in this case, the way we chose to put it through, it could either be a PMA device, which would mean a class 3 medical device, and that would be considerable amounts. But we were able to break the games down, find base constructs within them that fit within devices that have been approved before. So we worked on what was called a class 2 and using a 510K process, substantial equivalence. And then what you do there is not only do you do some of your own clinical work and stuff like that, but it's really important. I think we see people do this too often. It's really important to look at the literature that already exists. And what we see happen too often is I'm going to run my own clinical, I'm going to do my own thing. Those could be hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions. They take years to get done. And when we're trying to get a device in the field, trying to make an impactful difference, the first thing you really need is strong literature review. Deeply dive into what already has been done and see if you don't find an intersection between what you're trying to accomplish and what's already been tested. It certainly allows the agency to help you reduce down the amount of folks you got to study and everybody to get more comfortable that the thing you're building is valid and that the funds that are available for doing clinicals get used to do new research versus repeating things that have already occurred.
Okay. Okay. So there's obviously a huge range in quality among mental health apps in the market.
Yes.
How can patients or providers discern between valid digital therapeutics versus maybe a general wellness tool? Is there any risk of confusion?
I think there's tons of risk and confusion, and I think some of the wellness apps actually play on that risk of confusion. They use that as a way to get themselves positioned, some of which are very valid tools. So, figuring out what to use can be very, very tricky. But this is a lot of why we're doing the work with the agency we are right now to clear the over the counters. It's to say that a lot of these wellness devices probably should be pulled a little bit more into a regulated path so we can get a greater level of differentiation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's really useful. The FDA is helpful there. The FTC is also out there doing their bit. So if you don't want to be FDA regulated, you figure you're a wellness device. Then what you've got to be doing, which we don't see enough, is not using the words that the FDA would not want to see you use. So in a clearance, you shouldn't be talking about stress as a mental health concern. You certainly shouldn't be talking about anxiety and depression. We see a lot of those wellness apps. We're going to help you with your depression. Well, that means you're a medical device.
Yeah.
And so we want to see those that are medical devices cleared as such. We want to see those as wellness devices compliant to the FTC's requirements, which is a lot of substantiation. So just because you're outside of the FDA's parameter doesn't mean you don't need a quality system, doesn't mean that you don't need to have run a clinical, doesn't mean that you haven't had to substantiate that the claims that you're making can tie back to research that's been done. That research is current. And sadly, sometimes that takes a level of enforcement. We did see just a little over a year ago that the FDA started working with the FTC the way they did in the 90s around nutraceuticals to give them more power around digital therapeutics as well. For those folks that are looking at more of that consumer path, they're asking the FTC to help out as well and go, look, are we really seeing things here that are substantiated and that have clearly delineated their claims as non-medical, yet still, something that is supplementally helping an individual with a condition or an issue. So we look for people to differentiate. Individuals got to get savvy. 20,000 digital therapeutics were released over the last 3 years. There was something that amounts to a regulatory holiday. I mean, the FDA recognizing that it needed help with mental health in particular allowed people to put cognitive behavioral therapeutics out as digital therapeutics without the FDA requiring approval. And so that meant a lot of stuff got out in the field, some of which was very, very useful. But that didn't mean they actually expected you to do anything less than you would have to get the approvals or the clearances. You still needed your quality system. You still needed to run and to had something you thought you were substantially equivalent to. You needed to have internal determinations around risk, why you were doing what you were doing, tested where you need to, or have substantial equivalence. And I think what we're finding in the cleanup is that, if there was 20,000 of them in the field and the FDA is called in for all the 510Ks here, we're due back in by November, and we're seeing something between 15 to 20 things approved. My guess is in the wash, and the difference is a lot of stuff that may not yet have the efficacy and the backing. That doesn't mean it doesn't work, but it does make it really hard to tell which ones do and don't. And we hear a lot of people say things like, well, I didn't do any harm. I didn't make it any worse. Well, deferral of care. is harm, right? If people
Yeah,
think they're
yeah,
treating themselves and they're not getting treated, that is also harm.
that's harmful. Yeah,
Especially when we talk about mental health and where the determinations where you can go from, feeling fairly well one day to really needing additional help the next day. So in well-constructed digital therapeutics, you also see a good devising line that says, look, if this is not working, in our case, it's by 7 days. This is probably not for you. If at any given moment you're feeling a spike of certain behaviors or thoughts or concepts that would take you out of the mild to moderate category, here's a help button for things that can help you, which also very much tells you this is not for you now,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's really valuable. You can be an island in this ocean of information where folks come and they find you, and this is something we've talked to the agency about, why clearing the over counters are very valuable too, is it doesn't hurt for someone to come find something, think that they're mild to moderate, start to use it, not find necessarily that it's doing what they need it to
Yeah.
do. And that becomes, that thing that says, I better figure out another treatment. I better take this a little bit more seriously. I think that's a really valuable service that we can provide as well.
Man, that is hugely educational information right there. And hopefully for the folks that watch this, it can provide a lot of guidance into what to look for when they're looking at these apps and these tools, these digital tools. So I greatly appreciate that insight, and hopefully that will help others when they start seeking that out, whether that's patients or clinicians or anybody that's trying to incorporate some digital therapeutics, just help them guide through some of the weeds there. Looking ahead, how do you expect to see the use of digital therapeutics for behavioral health evolve, like in the next 5 to 10 years? What
Well, let me back
excites
up and tell
you?
you what I
Yeah,
think is going to be most impactful, and then that'll move us forward.
yeah.
I think there's really two things that work right now in digital therapeutics. Many of these are distraction-based tools at the moment. So if you've got pain, digital therapeutics has answers. We can
Hmm.
have seen the ability to reduce the dependence on opioids to manage pain just simply through distraction mechanisms. If you're disconnected and loneliness and those sorts of situations, social constructs work. We understand how to put motion into these games in a way that you are able to do more physical activity than you otherwise would do, or that you would perceive you're doing. And so we see opportunities there, biofeedback loops. Those are all really powerful things that will work. But if they don't have immediate impact, what happens by taking a therapeutic and making it digital is you don't ever stay neutral on its capability. It either gets better because it's designed to be a digital therapeutic and it has an immediate response, or it uses the platform in a way that allows it to expand upon the benefits of being digital, or it's actually in the way. So we've seen a lot of things become VR based, and they're like, oh, this is immersive. No, not if you put it in VR, it's not necessarily immersive. That's like saying 70 years ago, I'm going to have a hit TV show. How do you know that? Well, I'm going to put it on TV. We know that to not be true.
Yeah,
I'm going to have something immersive. How do you know it's immersive? Well, I've put it in VR. No, your opportunity to be immersive is higher. But
gotcha.
if you're not, amplifying that therapeutic through the VR delivery, you're probably actually reducing the accessibility to care, especially over like a biofeedback mechanism or something like that. So we see the potential to be very powerful, either because you have immediate impact, like with distraction, or because you can wield the media behind it, which means you can start to use play elements, game loops, the things that have been really effective. And this is not gamification, this is true play. When you get the mind involved in true play, you become very dopaminergic, you become quite suggestible, and that gives us an opportunity to get you to do things that you otherwise wouldn't do. And that
Yeah.
is what medicine is about. If we were good at taking care of ourselves, we would need a lot of these things. And as doctors and device designers and people that work in medicine, we for the longest time spent a whole bunch of time saying this is good for you, and we expect that's enough of a reason for you to do it. But that's really not the way we work as humans. We don't really have a good neurological hook for longitudinally taking care of ourselves. So digital therapeutics can bring you into that digital world and immerse you in a way that you're going to do things that are good for you. Well, you're not much attention, but they're good for you. Powerful. When we do that work, we have the chance to get you interconnected and part of community.
Hmm.
That also is going to make you someone that's just a patient who is going to be more responsive to therapies. Beyond that as well, we can kind of bring you and calm you down to a place where your own immune function doesn't necessarily work against you. As a therapy designer, I always have to look at what level of stress you're at the moment that we're administering a therapy, and the higher level of stress or that you're in, really the higher dose we got to push. And one of the interesting things we're seeing that I think is an amazing future for digital therapeutics is not just as a compliance mechanism to get you to do the thing that's good for you, but actually to enhance companion therapies. And I think we're going to see drugs being lowered in dose when you can play the right thing along with them and stuff like that,
Yeah.
where we
Yeah.
get you immunologically in a place where you're not fighting, you're not revved up full of T cells fighting, the drug as it comes into your body, and therefore having to take the dose higher and therefore having to have more of the side effects. So there's a lot of power here that we can wield once we better understand it. But the build it and they will come model, oh, it's digital, so it must be better. That is only true when it almost works immediately in the distraction realm, like I said, with pain. But for the most part, if it needs compliance, it needs to be compelling. And the only people that really know how to make media compelling are the folks that have been working in immersive media for the last 50, 60 years. And that's why we've been focusing on so with that. These are the most profound behavioral scientists of our generation. They know how to get us to do things that we don't otherwise know how to get ourselves to do. And that intersection where media meets medicine is where I think we're going to see a lot of power.
Yeah. Damn, that's exciting stuff. I really am. I'm nerding out.
I live in a nerd out state, so
I bet, man. I bet. That's awesome. I think you've already pretty much answered this through a number of the questions that I've asked, but for providers or organizations that are interested in exploring digital therapeutics, is there any additional advice that you would give to them? Again, you've given a ton of advice already. So they just need to kind of watch this. But is there anything that you haven't added to that?
I'd go real. I mean, I think it's really important to understand what it is that is the mechanism of action. Does that mechanism of action best suit a digital therapeutic? And if it does, start working with people doing it successfully. I'd be careful. There's a lot of people that have positioned themselves as working in this intersection of, through gamification and stuff like that. Okay, what can you point to that you've been successful at? And remember, there's only 20 of these released. So for all the things that people are doing, show me one that's been effective. Help me understand that the intersection between learning, science, delivering good media, and medicine. And that's a small crew of folks that are out there. But if you find those people, if they're the right people, they'll also help you earnestly assess whether or not what you've got in mind is a good digital therapeutic.
Awesome stuff, Ryan. I really appreciate your time. I'm not going to keep you any longer. So again, Ryan Douglas, founder of DeepWell DTx, based out of Seattle, Washington. I thank you so much for your time today. It has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for diving into this.
Thanks. Appreciate being invited. Great questions. Thank you very much.
Awesome, man. Thank you guys so much.